Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we take a stack of sources, articles, and research and really try to distill the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight for you.
That's the goal.
Today, we're diving into, well, one of the most fascinating questions in cognitive science. What actually happens in your brain the moment you understand a word?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, take a simple word like kick. It feels effortless, right? Instantaneous.
Completely.
But beneath that simplicity lies one of the deepest mysteries of the human mind. And for a long time, the scientific community was really divided on this.
Oh, absolutely. It's true. For decades, cognitive science essentially had two very different, often, fiercely competing answers to that exact question.
Right.
And these two perspectives, they basically defined a central debate in the field. Unpacking them really reveals just how complex something that feels so simple can be.
So tell us about these two camps then, the ones that shaped the debate for so long. Where did the initial thinking sort of begin?
Well, the first major viewpoint was what we generally call the amodal or symbolic view.
Amodal.
Yeah, amodal. Imagine your brain operating like an incredibly vast, intricate dictionary. Or maybe think of it like a super fast computer database.
Okay.
So when you hear kick, your brain performed this lightning-quick lookup. It accesses an abstract symbolic entry for kick.
Abstract.
Right. Crucially, this entry isn't tied to any physical sensation or action. It's more like a list of abstract features. Think, like action involves foot, forceful.
Got it.
And importantly, the symbol is connected to other abstract symbols, things like ball or door, purely through this network of associations within the system.
So, okay, if I'm getting this right, it's almost as if the meaning of kick is defined only by its relationship to other words and abstract symbols within the language system itself, not by anything in the real world, like how a computer just processes text strings.
Precisely. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's an elegant idea, actually, and it really helped explain things like how we build complex sentences, understand grammar, that sort of thing.
But I sense a but coming.
But yes, then a very different, almost, radical idea emerged. This was the embodied or modal view.
Embodied, okay.
And this theory really threw a wrench into that whole brain as a disembodied computer analogy. It argued that to understand kick, your brain doesn't just look up an abstract symbol, it actually simulates the experience of kicking.
Wait, hold on. Simulates, as in my brain actually sort of pretends to kick something just when I hear the word.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
That's the core idea. It means that the very same neural circuits, well, maybe not exactly the same down to the neuron, but the same areas in your motor cortex that would fire to control your leg if you were physically kicking.
Uh-huh.
They become partially active just from hearing or reading the word. It's like a whisper of the actual experience, a faint echo.
Wow.
So, according to this view, our understanding isn't abstract at all. It's fundamentally grounded in the sensory and motor systems of our bodies.
Right, so the body is key.
Exactly. The body's absolutely key. So, to understand green, your brain partially activates circuits involved in seeing green. To understand cinnamon, you simulate, maybe faintly smelling it, and for grasp, you simulate the action of grasping.
Okay, that's a very different picture.
It was a revolutionary concept, really, because it suggested the mind isn't separate from the body. It's inextricably linked to it.
That truly sets up a fascinating and, well, fundamental conflict, doesn't it? The brain as computer versus the brain as simulator. It sounds like a disagreement about the very nature of thought itself. So for decades, which camp was winning the argument? What did the evidence say?
That became the central scientific battleground. For years, researchers designed these incredibly clever experiments, trying to pin it down, trying to settle it. And one of the most influential early experiments, one that really seemed to provide strong, compelling evidence for the embodied view, was what became known as the object orientation effect.
Ah, yes, the object orientation effect. And this brings us to that pivotal 2001 study, Stanfield and Swan. Their experiment was, on the surface, deceptively simple, but the results were incredibly impactful at the time.
They were.
They'd show participants a sentence, and the sentence implied an object in a specific orientation. For instance, the eagle is in the sky.
And immediately, you, the listener, you picture that eagle, wings outstretched, soaring. You probably don't picture it perched on a branch with wings folded.
Exactly, that's the implied orientation. Then right after the sentence, flash, a picture of an eagle would appear on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Your job was simply to confirm as quickly as possible, yes, that's an eagle. The clever twist, the manipulation, was that the picture could either match the implied orientation from the sentence, an eagle with wings out, or mismatch it, say, an eagle with wings folded as if it were perched.
Right. Match versus mismatch. And the original finding was, well, it was quite compelling. People were significantly faster to recognize the eagle when the picture's orientation matched what the sentence implied.
Which, to many researchers at the time, felt like a smoking gun for mental simulation.
It really did.
The logic seemed clear. If your brain is actively simulating an eagle with its wings out while reading the sentence, then seeing a picture that matches that simulation, well, it makes processing easier, faster.
Right.
But a mismatch creates this sort of cognitive hiccup, right? Your brain has to adjust its simulation or deal with the conflict, and that costs you precious milliseconds.
Okay.
Certainly made a lot of intuitive sense.
It absolutely did. And for that reason, it quickly became a kind of cornerstone finding. It was cited in countless papers as, pretty solid proof of embodied cognition.
Mm-hmm.
But science, at its best anyway, is a self-correcting process. It really thrives on skepticism and, crucially, on replication.
And this is where we hit the 2010s, and the entire field of psychology finds itself grappling with what was dubbed the replication crisis.
Yes, a very challenging time.
This wasn't just like a minor reevaluation. It was a genuine crisis that sent shockwaves through the field, forcing psychologists to question some long-held truths and maybe even the foundations of their science.
A lot of scrutiny.
A lot of scrutiny. Many well-known findings, textbook examples even, were put to these rigorous, large-scale tests, and, well, many of them simply failed to hold up.
And the object orientation effect, being so influential, was definitely one of the prominent findings that came under this new, very rigorous microscope.
That's right. And this led to a truly massive replication attempt. This wasn't just, one lab doing a quick repeat. This was a multi-lab, pre-registered study.
Pre-registered being key there.
Absolutely. Coordinated by the Psychological Science Accelerator, which is this amazing global network of psychology labs dedicated to running large, rigorous experiments.
Mm-hmm.
They tested over 3,000 participants.
3,000.
Yeah, in 18 different languages. I mean, everything from English and Polish to Arabic and simplified Chinese, really trying to see if this effect was universal.
Wow.
They even measured each participant's individual ability to mentally rotate objects, just to see if maybe some people were better simulators, and showed a stronger effect. They controlled for virtually everything imaginable.
Okay, so this is the gold standard test, really.
Yep.
Putting this classic finding under the most intense scrutiny possible. So what did they find? Did it hold up?
The effect. It simply did not appear.
Gone.
Gone. Not in English, not in any of the other 17 languages. An individual's mental rotation ability made no difference whatsoever. The finding that had been a key piece of evidence for embodied cognition for something like a decade, it just wasn't there when subjected to this level of methodological rigor.
Wow. That's a significant blow to a theory, wouldn't you say? I mean, one of your foundational pieces of evidence just vanishes under scrutiny. Where does that leave your understanding?
It's certainly a challenge to a simplistic version of the theory, definitely. But, a failed replication isn't really an endpoint in science.
Right, it's data.
It's critical data. It prompts new questions. It forces researchers to ask why it failed. Was the original finding just a statistical anomaly? A fluke, maybe? Or is the reality of how we understand words far more complex, more nuanced, than a simple match-mismatch effect could ever capture? This kind of result, it doesn't just invalidate, it actually helps refine theories. It pushes the field to move beyond maybe overly simplistic designs and towards a richer, more nuanced understanding of the human mind.
Okay, so the simple story of mental simulation, at least as tested by that specific effect, seems to be incomplete.
Yeah.
If the brain isn't just a simulator, but we've also kind of established it's probably not just a dictionary either.
Right.
What's the alternative? What's the more sophisticated model that the field has sort of gravitated towards now?
Yeah, the field has largely moved towards what's often called a hybrid or interplay model.
Hybriding.
The key insight here is that the brain isn't forced to choose between these two approaches. It's not an either-or situation.
Yeah.
Think of your brain as this highly pragmatic, incredibly efficient organ. It has both systems at its disposal, this symbolic language-based one and the embodied simulation-based one. And it uses them intelligently, flexibly, depending on the situation.
So it's not a battle between the two camps anymore, but more like a partnership.
Exactly. That's a great way to frame it. A partnership. The core idea is that the brain has these two complementary systems working in concert.
Okay, how does that partnership work? Which system does what?
So the first is what we generally call the language system. You can think of this one as being fast, computationally cheap, but often kind of shallow.
Shallow.
Yeah, in the sense that this system operates beautifully just on the statistical regularities of language itself. It knows from processing, billions and billions of words over your lifetime, that window is far more likely to appear near door or glass than it is near sheep or dream.
Hmm.
This is what we call amodal distributional knowledge. It's learned purely from the massive amount of language we're all exposed to.
And this sounds exactly like the kind of learning that modern large language models, like ChatGPT, are incredibly good at. They are masters of picking up these statistical patterns in language.
Precisely. That's a great parallel. And this system is incredibly efficient for quick, everyday comprehension. But then there's the second system, the sensorimotor system.
Okay, the embodied part.
Right. This one is generally thought to be slower, perhaps more resource intensive, but it provides the deep grounding.
Deep grounding.
Yeah. It's the system that can actually simulate the visual appearance of a window or the feeling of opening one or the action of looking through it. This is where the abstract word connects ultimately to our lived bodily experience.
Okay, so we have a fast and shallow linguistic system and a slower but deeper sensorimotor system.
Mhm.
In this partnership, which one generally takes the lead? Who's doing the heavy lifting most of the time?
Well, the evidence from a pretty large and growing body of research now points fairly clearly to the language system as the dominant partner in most situations.
Mhm.
It seems to do the bulk of the work. Its effects on things like processing time, they tend to be consistently larger and more reliable across studies. However, the sensorimotor system isn't just like a passive backup. It provides crucial, deep grounding when it's needed.
When it's needed.
Exactly.
Right.
And the real scientific challenge then becomes figuring out when exactly is it needed? Under what conditions does the brain call upon this deeper simulation? And the answer, it turns out, isn't simple at all. It depends on this dynamic interplay of several factors.
Right. And to really untangle this complex partnership, some really groundbreaking research like the work we're drawing on here has adopted a more sophisticated multi-level approach. They've analyzed these huge data sets to see how the brain actually uses these language and vision systems. And they found that the balance shifts depending on at least three key levels.
Okay, 3 levels. What are they?
First, the specific task you're performing with the word. Second, the properties of the word itself. And third, maybe most intriguingly, you, the individual who's doing the processing.
Wow.
This is really critical because it moves us beyond a simple, does embodiment happen or not? Question to asking, under what specific conditions does it happen? How strongly and potentially for whom?
Okay, that sounds like a much more realistic, nuanced way to approach it. Let's break those down. Let's start with the first level, the task. How does what you're actually doing with a word change how your brain understands it?
It changes it profoundly. So researchers often compare different experimental tasks that place varying demands on your brain. Take a lexical decision task, for instance.
Right, like the priming studies we talked about.
Exactly. All you have to do there is decide quickly, is this string of letters a real word or not? Is building a word? Yes. Is gop a word? No. It's a relatively shallow task, right? You can often respond based just on the word's form, maybe how familiar it looks, without really digging deep into its meaning.
Okay, makes sense.
But then you compare that to a semantic decision task. Here, the question is explicitly about meaning. For example, is the word hammer a concrete object?
Ah, okay. To answer that, you have to access the concept's meaning much more deeply. You can't just rely on the spelling.
Precisely. And what the research consistently shows across many studies now is that the influence of vision-based information, the sensorimotor system's contribution, is significantly stronger and much more reliable in this dupper semantic task compared to the shallower lexical task.
So it's like the brain is being incredibly efficient almost.
Yeah.
Lazy in a smart way.
You could absolutely call it efficient laziness. I like that. It doesn't waste cognitive energy firing up a full-blown mental simulation unless the task at hand actually requires that level of detail.
Okay.
And this efficiency is even more apparent when we look at the timing of these processes. There was this fascinating analysis done revisiting a large semantic priming data set. They manipulated the time between showing a prime word, like maybe bolt, and a target word, like screwdriver. This gap is called the stimulus onset asynchrony, or SOA.
Right, the SOA.
They looked at a very short SOA, just a fraction of a second, like 200 milliseconds, and a much longer one, over a full second.
Now, what would the older, simpler models have predicted about the timing here? Would we expect the language effect, the fast one, to show up really early, and the simulation effect, the slower one, to come in much later?
That would be the classic sort of intuitive prediction, yes.
Hmm.
Language first, simulation later. But what they actually found was, well, it was surprising. Both the language-based priming effect and the vision-based priming effect were strongest at the very short, almost instantaneous SOA.
Both. At the short one, that seems counterintuitive. If simulation is supposed to be slower and more resource intensive, how can its effect be strongest almost immediately?
This is where the context dependency of the whole system really shines.
Mm-hmm.
The interpretation is that in a shallow task like lexical decision, both systems might actually get activated incredibly quickly.
Okay.
The language system gives you that fast statistical hint, like bolt and screwdriver often appear together. And the sensoromotor system might kick off a very quick, maybe partial simulation, perhaps the visual form of a screwdriver.
Right.
But here's the key. Because the task is shallow and doesn't require deep understanding, that simulation isn't sustained. It gets triggered, it provides a fleeting boost maybe, but then it rapidly decays because your brain realizes, hey, I don't need this detailed visual simulation just to decide if screwdriver is a word.
Ah, I see.
So by the time you get to the longer time intervals, that initial visual priming effect has already faded away because it wasn't necessary for the job. Your brain is constantly dynamically managing its cognitive resources, deciding where to invest its energy second by second.
That's amazing. So the brain is incredibly adaptable, tuning its strategy to the task at hand. But you said there were 3 levels. Does the word itself play a role? That's the second level.
Absolutely. This level is perhaps more straightforward, but just as crucial. It probably won't surprise you that sensor motor simulation seems to play a much bigger role for concrete words.
Like hammer or apple.
Exactly, than it does for highly abstract words like justice or theory.
Right. It's hard to simulate justice physically.
It really is. Abstract concepts are thought to rely much more heavily on the linguistic system, perhaps grounded in other domains like emotion or social interaction, rather than direct perception or action.
Okay.
The big methodological leap here, though, is moving beyond just a simple abstract versus concrete bucket. Researchers now use these really rich, continuous measures. They come from massive databases, like the Lancaster Sensoromotor Norm.
Sensoromotor norms.
Yeah, basically thousands of human participants have rated tens of thousands of words on scales like how much do you associate this word with the sense of sight, or auditory strength, haptic strength, touch, and so on.
Ah, so you get a whole profile for each word.
Exactly, a detailed profile. And this allows for a far more precise, nuanced analysis than just sorting words into 2 rigid categories. You can say how much visual information a word carries versus auditory versus action, and so on.
That makes a lot of sense. And it gets even more fascinating, you said, when you realize that who is doing the understanding matters immensely. That brings us to the 3rd level, the individual. This feels like where the story gets really personal and, well, complex.
It absolutely is. And this is arguably one of the most crucial and insightful parts of the recent research we've looked at. For a long, long time, cognitive psychology often averaged results across many people,
Right, looking for the universal human mind.
kind of treating the mind as this generic processor,
Mm.
trying to find those universal patterns. But this recent work powerfully demonstrates that individual differences aren't just noise in the data that you need to average out.
Mm-hmm.
They're a vital source of information about how cognition actually works in different people.
Mm-hmm.
And a key individual difference explored in this line of research is vocabulary size.
Vocabulary size. Now, intuitively, my first thought might be that people with larger vocabularies, these language experts, essentially they probably rely more on the language system for everything, right? They're the masters of words and their statistical patterns.
That's a very reasonable hypothesis. It makes perfect sense on the surface. But the reality, as revealed by these large-scale analyses, appears far more nuanced and, frankly, more interesting.
Okay.
This research reveals a really consistent pattern that the authors describe as a task relevance advantage for high vocabulary individuals.
Task relevance advantage. What does that mean?
It means it's not that they always rely on one system more than the other. It's that they seem remarkably better at strategically deploying the right system or focusing on the most relevant information for the specific job at hand.
Okay, so tell us about the evidence for that. How does this task relevance advantage actually manifest in the data?
All right, let's look at it. Remember the two tasks, shallow lexical decision and deep semantic decision.
Got it. Word non-word versus meaning judgment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in the shallow lexical decision task, where the goal is simply to identify if it's a real word, and the most useful information comes from those fast statistical language patterns. High vocabulary participants show greater sensitivity to that language-based information, those statistical patterns, than their lower vocabulary peers. They seem better, more efficient at using that linguistic shortcut when it's useful.
Okay, that fits the language expert idea.
It does. But now, switch to the deep semantic decision task. Here, the goal is to judge a word's concreteness. So the most relevant information isn't the linguistic pattern anymore, it's its physical sensorimotor property. How concrete is it?
Right.
And this is where the high vocabulary participants pivot. They now show greater sensitivity to the word's concreteness rating, the sensorimotor information. In contrast, the lower vocabulary individuals seem to be influenced by a kind of wider, less focused set of word features in both tasks, suggesting maybe less strategic control over which information source they prioritize.
Wow. Okay, that's a huge aha moment right there, isn't it?
It really is.
So, what this really suggests is that having a big vocabulary isn't just about knowing more definitions. It seems to be linked to having a more advanced cognitive control system for language, this ability to flexibly tune your processing to zero in on the most relevant information for the specific demands of the moment.
Precisely. It suggests that expertise, at least linguistic expertise, might not just be about having a larger database of knowledge in your head. It might be about acquiring a more sophisticated set of cognitive algorithms or strategies for deploying that knowledge with incredible flexibility and efficiency.
That's fascinating.
And this perspective can actually help explain some previously confusing or contradictory results in the literature. By analyzing multiple tasks and multiple types of information within a single large-scale framework, this powerful principle emerges. Linguistic skill doesn't just make you better at language tasks. It seems to enhance your overall cognitive flexibility in how you approach meaning.
Okay, but we've been talking about these remarkably subtle effects, right? How the brain's strategy shifts based on the task, the word, even a person's individual skills like vocabulary. It sounds like these effects, especially the interactions, must be incredibly small and potentially difficult to detect reliably.
Difficult is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an understatement. And this leads us to another absolutely crucial point that really speaks to the foundation of how psychological science, especially cognitive science, is conducted today. It's about methodology and specifically statistical power.
Statistical power.
Yeah. Take, for example, a 2022 PhD thesis by Pablo Bernabeu, which is one of the key sources informing this deep dive. It includes a really comprehensive statistical power analysis based on large data sets.
Okay.
Now, in simple terms, power analysis asks a basic question. Given the likely size of a particular effect you're looking for, like the influence of visual information or the interaction with vocabulary size, how many people do you actually need to test to have a decent chance, say 80% or 90%, of finding that effect if it's really there?
Right. It's about making sure your experiment is sensitive enough, like having a powerful enough microscope to actually see the tiny thing you're looking for.
Exactly that. It's about sensitivity. And the results of this kind of analysis, when applied to these subtle effects in language processing, are incredibly revealing, maybe even a bit sobering for the field.
How so? What sort of numbers are we talking about?
Well, according to the estimates from that analysis, just to reliably detect the main dominant effect of language-based information, the big, strong statistical pattern effect, you probably need somewhere around 300 participants.
300. Okay, that's already much larger than the, say, 30 or 40 participants that were pretty common in many older psycholinguistic studies,
Well,
right?
much larger, yeah. But here's the real kicker. To reliably detect the smaller, more subtle effect of vision-packed information, the sensorimotor grounding, the estimate jumps to needing around 1,200 participants.
500.
1,200. And if you want to reliably detect the crucial interactions, like how the language effect changes with vocabulary size, or how the vision effect changes with vocabulary size, or even how these effects change over time with different SOAs,
Yeah.
you're looking at needing around 1,500 participants or more. For some interactions, like with gender, the estimate was over 2,000, suggesting those effects might be tiny or non-existent.
1,500 people for a single experiment.
Right,
That's
right.
that's an enormous number. What does that imply for all that previous research, the decades of work that was done with, 30, 40, maybe 50 people?
It implies we have to interpret that historical literature with extreme caution. It means that many, perhaps even most, of those older studies were statistically underpowered.
Underpowered. I mean, they just didn't have enough participants to reliably detect the effects they were looking for.
Exactly. An underpowered study is like trying to see a very dim star on a night with a lot of light pollution.
Mm,
You might occasionally think you see a flicker, maybe convince yourself it's there, but you can't be sure, and you'll miss it most of the time.
okay.
Statistically, low power leads to two major problems. First, and most obviously, you get a lot of false negatives. You miss real effects that are actually there simply because your study wasn't sensitive enough.
Right.
Second, and this is the really paradoxical and tricky part, the few times you do happen to get a statistically significant result in an underpowered study, maybe just by chance fluctuation, that effect size is almost guaranteed to be wildly overestimated.
Overestimated. How does that work?
Because only the randomly large fluctuations will cross the threshold for statistical significance in a noisy, underpowered study. So the effects you do find look much bigger and more important than they really are in the population.
Ah. And this sounds like it could be a core ingredient, maybe the core ingredient for that replication crisis we discussed earlier, doesn't it?
It absolutely is. This is now seen as a highly likely explanation, maybe the primary one, for why things like the object orientation effect seem so strong and clear in the original small study, but then completely vanished in the large, high-powered replication attempt.
So the original finding wasn't necessarily wrong, just maybe a statistical illusion?
Very likely. A flicker of noise that, because of the low power, was mistaken for a real, stable star. What this work demonstrates so powerfully is that to study the subtle interactive nature of human cognition properly, these intricate dances between systems, we simply cannot rely on small, isolated studies anymore.
We need bigger studies.
We need massive, often collaborative efforts, like the ones that actually produce the very data analyzed in these power analyses projects, like the English Lexicon Project or the Semantic Priming Project, which involve testing thousands and thousands of people. The very nature of the phenomenon we're studying dictates the methods we must use. And for understanding complex human cognition, especially these subtle interactions, those methods simply have to be big science now.
Okay, so we need large samples to have the statistical power, but there's one final, really profound piece to this methodological puzzle you mentioned that feels like a deep one. How do we even measure these different kinds of meaning in the first place?
Right, this is critical.
In the research we've been digging into, language-based information was often operationalized using computational models like Word2Vec or similar distributional semantic models.
Trained on billions of words of text.
Exactly. They learn to represent a word's meaning based purely on the context, the other words it appears with. Vision-based information, on the other hand, was primarily measured using things like those Lancaster sensoromotor norms we talked about.
Right, based on human ratings.
Thousands of human participants rating words on subjective scales like, how much do you associate this word with the sense of sight? Or how much action does it involve?
Okay, so on one hand, you have a measure derived from a machine analyzing massive amounts of language in the wild, a process that's been optimized and benchmarked for decades in computational linguistics.
Right.
And on the other hand, you have a measure derived directly from people's subjective, introspective judgments about words and their connection to sensory experience. Does that fundamental difference in how we measure these two sides of meaning, does that matter?
It matters immensely. And the researchers raising these points highlight two potentially critical issues here. The first is what we could call the circularity problem.
Circularity.
Yeah, there's a potential, maybe subtle circularity in using human judgments about words, like those sensor-motor readings, to then predict human behavior with those very same words and experiments. Are we just predicting judgments with judgments?
I see the potential issue there. Okay.
But the second, and perhaps even more impactful issue, is what has been termed an accident of history.
An accident of history.
Think about it. The computational linguistics community has spent decades benchmarking, competing, refining, and optimizing their text-based models like Word2Vec. They have become incredibly precise and effective tools for capturing that statistical, distributional aspect of meaning.
Right. There's a whole infrastructure around evaluating them.
Exactly. In contrast, the tools for measuring embodiment, like sensor motor norms, while incredibly valuable, are generally newer. They've undergone arguably less rigorous competitive optimization and are maybe inherently fuzzier because they rely on subjective ratings. They are arguably less precise measurement instruments.
Okay. So this raises a truly fundamental and maybe uncomfortable question, doesn't it?
Mm,
Is the language system truly the dominant partner in meaning, as the results consistently seem to suggest?
right.
Or do we just happen to have a much, much better, more sensitive, more precise ruler for measuring linguistic effects than we currently do for measuring embodied effects? Could we be systematically underestimating the body's role in meaning simply because our rulers for it aren't as refined yet?
That is a fascinating, critical, and still very much open question in the field. The evidence for language dominance is strong, let's be clear. It comes from many different studies using different methods.
Hmm.
However, this asymmetry in our measurement tools is a significant potential confounding factor that we simply have to acknowledge and grapple with. It's a clear call to arms, really, for the field.
A call to arm.
Yeah, to invest serious effort in developing and validating measures for the sensoromotor, the embodied side of meaning, that are just as sophisticated, just as precise, just as well benchmarked as the ones we have for the linguistic side. Only then can we be truly confident in comparing their relative contributions.
That's a powerful thought. The very tools we use to conduct our science can, perhaps inevitably, shape the answers we get.
They always do, to some extent. And important progress in science often comes not just from brand new discoveries, but from a deeper, more humble, more critical understanding of the limitations and potential biases of our existing tools. The theoretical finding that meaning is this complex, context-dependent interplay is really inextricably linked to the methodological finding that we need bigger samples and better, more comparable tools to truly study it effectively. The two really go hand in hand.
Now, a lot of the core research framing this hybrid view, especially the power analyses and individual differences work, was largely conducted or conceived before the most recent dramatic explosion of large language models, LLMs, like ChatGPT. How has this AI revolution fundamentally changed the conversation, the entire picture of how we think about meaning?
Oh, it's arguably one of the most disruptive things to happen to cognitive science, and especially the study of language, in decades.
Yeah.
It's forcing everyone to rethink basic assumptions.
How so?
Well, for years, a core argument, especially from embodied cognition theorists, was something called the symbol grounding problem.
Right, I've heard of that.
They famously argued, often using thought experiments like Searle's Chinese room, that a system trained only on text, a purely amodal, disembodied system, could never achieve true understanding. Its symbols would be ungrounded, just floating in an abstract space, connected only to each other, without any real connection to the world.
Like learning Chinese by only ever using a Chinese to Chinese dictionary. You can learn the relationships between symbols, maybe become fluent in manipulating them, but do you truly understand what they refer to in the real world?
Exactly, that was the argument. But now, these new LLMs, trained only on text, seem to be doing a remarkably, some would say spookily good job of understanding and using language. They can hold coherent conversations, write creative text, even reason to some extent.
Despite having no bodies, no senses, no physical experience of the world whatsoever.
Precisely. And their surprising competence is forcing a radical reevaluation of those foundational theories about grounding and embodiment. The field is responding in a few fascinating and sometimes conflicting ways.
Okay, what are the main responses?
Well, one camp argues that the success of LLMs is actually strong evidence against strong embodiment theories. They say it suggests that rich statistical learning from massive linguistic data sets is indeed sufficient, or at least largely sufficient, to generate meaning and intelligence. They propose that perhaps the language system, if scaled up enough, can actually infer the structure of the world from the structure of language alone without needing direct grounding.
So that's the language's dominant partner idea taken to its most extreme conclusion, perhaps. Language is enough.
You could see it that way, yeah. But then there's another equally vibrant camp taking the opposite approach. They are actively working to build the next generation of multimodal models.
Multimodal,
Meaning systems that don't just learn from text, but also from images, videos, sounds, maybe even simulated actions. They're explicitly trying to ground linguistic symbols in perceptual data, saying, okay, text is powerful, but true understanding requires connecting words to sights and sounds and actions. Let's give these AIs virtual eyes and ears.
right, try to build embodiment into the AI.
Exactly. And adding another layer, Recent computational neuroscience work is creating these more brain-constrained models. And some of these models show how learning a linguistic label, just learning the word for a category, can actually causally reshape how the network organizes its conceptual representations, making them more robust, more abstract, more distinct.
So language isn't just reflecting concepts, it's actively sculpting them.
That's the implication. It suggests this deep mechanistic interplay where language actively shapes our perceptual and conceptual systems, not just points to them.
And it seems like at the same time, the very definition of embodiment itself is expanding, isn't it? It's not just about the five external senses we usually think of: sight, sound, touch, taste, smell.
Exactly. There's this huge surge of interest now in interoception.
Interoception, that's our sense of the internal state of our own body, right?
Precisely. Our brain's sense of what's going on inside our heart rate, our breathing, that feeling in our gut, maybe subtle changes in our internal organs, muscle
Our
tension.
visceral internal sensations.
Yeah. And emerging theories are proposing that our understanding of highly abstract concepts, words like anxiety, hope, justice, maybe even trust, might not be grounded primarily in external actions or perceptions, but might be deeply rooted in these internal, visceral, bodily states.
Wow. So understanding anxiety is partly feeling that flutter in your chest, or understanding hope involves some internal physiological shift.
That's the idea being explored. This is a truly exciting frontier because it totally expands what we even think of as a sense or a modality that could be used for grounding the meaning of words, especially the really abstract ones that have always been tricky for embodiment theories.
Fascinating.
So, after this incredible journey, through the debates, the experiments, the replications, the hybrid models, the methods, the AI, let's come back to where we started. That simple word, kick. What have we learned? What actually happens in our minds when we understand it?
Well, I think the clearest takeaway is that understanding even a simple word like kick isn't a single simple event. It's
Right.
definitely not just a quick dictionary lookup. Nor is it likely an automatic, obligatory, full-blown physical simulation every single time.
Mm.
It seems to be a much more dynamic, flexible, and fundamentally constructive process.
It sounds like it's a constant dance, maybe, between these two powerful systems we've discussed.
That's a perfect metaphor.
There's maybe a fast, efficient statistical guess from the language system, which gives you the basic context, the associations, the likelihoods.
The big and dirty meaning.
And then there's potentially a deeper, more detailed, but maybe optional or context-dependent simulation from the sensoromotor system, which grounds that meaning in your physical reality, connects it to action and perception.
Exactly. And maybe the most profound insight is that the choreography of that dance is constantly changing. It's being directed, moment by moment, by the specific task you're trying to accomplish with the word, by the properties of the word itself. Is it concrete, like kick, or abstract, like idea?
Yeah.
And most profoundly, by your unique linguistic skill, your vocabulary, and the specific cognitive architecture that you, as an individual, have built up over a lifetime of experience with language and the world.
So the architecture of meaning isn't like a static monument in the brain. It's more like a living, adaptive system that reconfigures itself on the fly depending on what's needed.
Beautifully put. That's exactly the picture emerging.
Which means, ultimately, the meaning of a word isn't just in the word itself, sitting there waiting to be accessed. It's not out there in the world objectively. And it's not just in some static dictionary in your head. It's in the interaction.
Yes.
It's in how your unique brain, with your unique history and skills, interacts with that word in a specific moment for a specific purpose.
Exactly. And that, I think, is a far more complex, far more dynamic, and ultimately far more interesting picture of human language and human cognition than a simple dictionary lookup or a simple simulation could ever be. It really shows us that every time we understand a word, every time we comprehend language, we are, in a small but profound way, recreating meaning anew.
A fantastic place to leave it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the truly fascinating frontiers of cognitive science. We hope you'll continue to explore the incredible mysteries of the mind with us next time.